For those passionate about music with depth, a storyline, or a cohesive theme, as of late there have been several 2D groups, bands, and seiyuu artists to go all in for concept albums. This small trend shows a different side to those artists, putting in the spotlight their storytelling skills across a multitude of songs. In this episode, you and I get to know a little bit more about this trend and which advantages and disadvantages it has in comparison to regular albums. Let's kick off this episode of Seiyuu Lounge. Welcome to Seiyuu Lounge. I am your host Vanessa, and today's topic is concept albums, the new trend for seiyuu artists and 2D groups. I've mentioned before, especially on episode 53, when I was asked during the Q&A video what kind of music I most enjoy reviewing, that I love albums with a consistent narrative. Either albums that put you in the story or take you alongside the artist to watch that story unfold. Narratives, stories that develop across several chapters. A theme and consistent sound are genuinely the type of things I love to find in albums. And if you follow the Hand That Feeds HQ's website, you'll notice that because I tend to write mini dissertations about those albums when I have to review them. After all, songs and poetry are some of the most interesting and powerful mediums to tell stories or convey deeper emotions to the listener. And when those two are paired up and both have a specific theme or follow a specific protagonist, you can get concept albums. Some of you may be listening to me saying all this and thinking that a concept album following a unique narrative is boring, or that it doesn't sound all that exciting. That's valid and perfectly okay. There's a reason why regular albums, assortment of songs not following a specific story, sell well. There are a lot of people that enjoy those. I dare say the majority of people that listens to music prefers those. I'm just the type of music listener and reviewer that really loves cohesive narratives under a theme rather than albums that are an assortment of music genres, one-off stories, and the sort. Either way, it is really interesting that 2D groups, bands, and seiyuu artists have been venturing in this territory. Especially when, if you look at the music by any of them a decade ago, there was not even a focus on having a story in the music they were performing. In the past couple of years, I dare say, since 2018 with Gran Rodeo's MS Cowboy no Gyakushu, that a concept album trend is ongoing. Well, I say a concept album trend, but if you check which albums have a cohesive concept going on, those are less than 10. So this is a niche trend going on that very few artists have tried. However, it is one that the boldest artists don't fear embracing. Why do I say boldest artists? Because concept albums can go wrong, really wrong. But that is a topic for later on in this episode. What are concept albums? First off, music reviewers worldwide do not have a consensus about this definition. I have my definition and it does go in line with reviewers from NME and The Independent. So have into attention that this is a definition that is in a gray zone. A concept album is an album whose tracks hold a larger purpose or meaning collectively than they do individually. That is achieved through a single central narrative or theme, and both can be developed through the instrumental, composition, or lyrics. There are concept albums that have the instrumentals, compositions, and lyrics all serving the same purpose, all developing that concept or giving life to that narrative through a protagonist or a set of protagonists. Of course, having a character holding the narrative together is not a must. Concept albums can be unified by a common theme on which all the songs are based. But even so, you notice a story unfold. It grows in intensity, it has a climax and a resolution. But you also have concept albums in which the concept is only found in the instrumentals and compositions, not so much in the performances, and the lyrics may not even suit that purpose. When it comes to concept albums, I believe that listening to one is like reading a book. The instrumental, composition, and lyrics all serve a purpose of bringing to life a narrative, setting a tone, a mood, and establish who is or are the protagonists in that story. And each song serves as a chapter in that story. When the album wraps up, that story comes to a close. You get the ending, whether open or closed. Listening to a concept album is indeed like reading a book. What are not considered concept albums? After that explanation, you can instantly tell that greatest hits albums, best of albums, remixes, and compilations are not considered concept albums. After all, the songs were not created originally for that album. They were just put together after being picked from different works. Can you have a concept album with just one new song? No, it still is not a concept album. What types of concept albums are there? Concept albums are commonly of two types that serve different purposes. You have music created with a movie, series, or feature video at its core. Concept albums that have music created with a visual medium at its core have a unique soundtrack twist to them. Those are usually incredibly cinematic, but for those checking them without following or checking the movie, series, video those are featured in, it may not click with the listener or have a big impact. And then you have the albums that tell a singular story across several chapters. Each track is a chapter in a story. Because those don't support any other type of media, concept albums of this type are the easiest to understand and click with. In both cases, if you listen just to one or two songs in the concept album instead of the full concept album in its original order, you won't fully understand the story nor the concept. Disadvantages. As you may have noticed, there are some disadvantages to concept albums. First off, if you're not the type of person that enjoys listening to an album from start to finish, concept albums are not for you. You can still enjoy the songs outside of the concept album, so you can listen, like I said before, to one or two songs from it, but you'll hardly get to understand or feel the story as a whole because you skipped chapters. So the first disadvantage is that people that do not listen to albums from start to finish and prefer playlists with random songs won't check concept albums and will hardly understand those. Then, for those that actually listen to the albums from start to finish, there's the possibility that the story that is being told simply does not click with the listener. Since a concept album follows a singular story from its very first to the last track, it has a specific tone and vibe, it may embrace a very specific music genre or have a very particular composition style. If any of that doesn't click with the listener right within the first song, there's a chance that the listener won't enjoy the rest of the album. That's the second issue that concept albums have. There's a risk that the consistency in sound, lyrics, and/or composition does not click with the listener. I can say for sure, if a concept album starts off too peppy, I will not enjoy it. So the intro track is essential to set a mood and grab the attention of the listener. But it is also a statement of what the listener can look forward to in that album. It is a sample of the sound to come, the stories to unfold. Concept albums have that risk of not clicking with the listener right off the bat, and if that happens, the listener won't enjoy the rest of the album because the story, theme, sound, and delivery in the first song don't click with them. The rest, on the same note, won't click as well. The third issue is also related to this one. If the concept album doesn't click with you, you won't fully enjoy it or even care for its story. So concept albums are a case of love it or hate it. There is no in-between. You either love a concept album because you clicked with it, or you couldn't enjoy it and simply don't like it. I know I said hate it, but usually what happens is that if music or the story don't click with you, you won't like it, or you'll be indifferent to it. Still, there's no in-between. Once again, that happens because the tone, stories, compositions, or lyrics are consistent throughout the album. The last disadvantage is the fact that concept albums can be restrictive creative-wise. If Seiyu put upon themselves the task of releasing a concept album, they know that they have to be consistent and can't deviate from it even once to avoid breaking immersion for the listener. That can be considered rather restrictive creative-wise, especially if Seiyu want to have a hand in creating their album but are not allowed by their music label to completely take over the music composition or lyrics writing for it. This can also be considered an advantage. I'll dive into it in a couple of minutes. Advantages of creating a concept album instead of a regular album. Enough about the disadvantages. As a fan of concept albums, I actually look at some of those disadvantages as advantages. Like I said earlier, concept albums have the instrumentals, compositions, and/or lyrics all serving the same purpose, all developing a core concept or giving life to a singular narrative through a protagonist or set of protagonists. So the first advantage is a cohesive story. There is one story at the core of a concept album. That story takes place throughout its several songs, with each track being a linear chapter in that story. There are ups and downs in tension, intermissions, dramatic twists, and a conclusion. That story keeps going and you get invested in it. For those that love narratives or music with a lot of depth, concept albums are perfect. The second advantage is the cinematic feel. Listening to a concept album is as much like reading a book as it is watching a movie unfold, or even participating in it. I tend to say that I do not rate instrumental tracks, intros, intermissions, or outros, because you really can't rate those. You can comment on those and how they feel, but rate them, I don't feel like anyone can rate them. Those tracks hold a concept album together. Those are what sets the tone or wraps up a whole piece of work. Those don't have lyrics, and as such, the story has to carry on by feeling only. Creating a soundscape, creating a tone, bringing the protagonists to the spotlight. That's the work that those instrumental tracks do. And if we're talking about a good concept album, those tracks will for sure leave a mark, sometimes even more than the songs that have lyrics. Although it's not mandatory, concept albums usually have an instrumental intro to set the tone for what the rest of the album holds. That track will for sure give a cinematic feel, completely suck you in to those 30 up to 50 minutes of high tension and a lot of emotions in those stories waiting for you. Concept albums may also have intermission tracks to signal that the tone or setting will be changing, usually to a much different sonority and lyrical approach. The outro, also mentioned as the conclusion or tail of the song, can also be instrumental, wrapping up the whole concept album pretty neatly. In case there are no instrumental tracks within a concept album, once again, those are not mandatory but common, you can still get that cinematic feeling as you go through the tracks within the album, especially if the music was composed with the purpose of creating a scene or setting a tone. The third advantage I bring to you is the possibility of Seiyu spreading their wings as storytellers. Through concept albums, you get to follow a story from start to finish. In case the Seiyu artist or band are singer-songwriters, you get to experience their storytelling skills throughout the album. That is really what makes a concept album incredibly fascinating to me. While I love to listen to concept albums when the artists in question wrote, composed, or even created the whole concept for them, it has a special meaning and feeling. It has their personal touch, and you can, in a way, get to know who they are as lyricists, composers, or producers. In the end, you get to know who they are as storytellers and artists. That is, in my opinion, what makes me really excited whenever there is news that a concept album is being released, and that the Seiyu part of the bands, groups, or even just as themselves, as solo artists, had a hand in its creation. They are allowed to spread their wings and take upon themselves the challenge of creating a story from start to finish. to be there for the creative process when it comes to the music composition, mixing, or even mastering. A concept album can be a bit restrictive in what you can or not do under a set theme, but if the seiyuu are determined on creating a story and want to see and hear it unfold, a concept album is the best way for them to showcase their talents as storytellers. Knowing how the seiyuu industry is filled with seiyuu with not only awesome singing skills, but that are also singer-songwriters, it wouldn't surprise me that in a couple of years, every solo artist will have their own opus, their concept album. Of course, at the moment I recorded this episode, singer-songwriters among seiyuu are still very few. Many write lyrics, but those that actively write lyrics and compose their music are very, very few. And among those, no one has released a concept album so far. The most common among seiyuu artists is for their music labels to outsource composers and lyricists to create the music and words that they will give life to with their performances. But it is still possible for concept albums to happen when seiyuu don't compose nor write their music. In case they aren't a part of the creative process, you can still experience interesting stories through the words of lyricists hired for that task. And you still get awesome stories to live through their words, music, and the performances by seiyuu. To sum it all up, a cohesive story, the cinematic feeling, and creative freedom are the three massive advantages to concept albums. Who has embraced the concept albums trend? It is safe to say that Gran Rodeo started the concept albums trend among male seiyuu. They started it with the experimental MS Cowboy no Gyakushu in 2018 and repeated the feat in 2021 with Bokutachi no Gunzo. Shunichi Toki has also got a love for concept albums, having two in his repertoire: Party Jacker, released in 2019, and True Gazer, released in 2020. Daisuke Ono released a monster concept album with Stargazer in 2020, and still in the same year, Makoto Furukawa released From Fairy Tail. And more recently, in 2021, Trigger completely threw it out of the park with the most consistent concept album released so far by seiyuu, titled Variant. Some seiyuu artists end up releasing concept albums, however not promoting those as such, which is the case with Makoto Furukawa's From Fairy Tail, but when you analyze the songs on it, you'll quickly notice that everything about it follows a very specific concept. Among solo artists, Shunichi Toki has embraced two completely different concepts and delivered two incredibly unique sets of performances that showcase his talents as a performer. He's the solo artist with the most concept albums in their repertoire, at least so far. Among bands, Gran Rodeo has been experimenting with conceptual albums and it has worked pretty well for them. Trigger managed to pull off something surreal with Variant. However, I won't cover in this episode any of the albums I've mentioned. That is talk for the next episode. Right now I want you to come to grips with what a concept album is or not, its types, as well as disadvantages and advantages that artists have when embracing those. If you haven't noticed so far, I do love to review concept albums as much as I love reviewing music by singer-songwriters. Concept albums open the possibilities for seiyuu artists and bands to showcase their storytelling skills, something that, although you get to hear in the songs they compose or write, has a completely different feeling and importance when they are part of a concept album. In that case, seiyuu aren't just writing one-off stories. They are creating and writing a bigger story, splitting it into chapters and making sure that by the end of the album, both the protagonist in that story gets an ending and the listener gets to go through an emotional roller coaster. In a way, writing lyrics and composing concept albums can be compared to writing a book. Thus, whenever seiyuu announce they are going that route, challenging themselves as singer-songwriters and artists, I can't help but to be excited about. Of course, some Seiyu don't write nor compose their music, but there are still impressive concept albums in which their interpretation, voice and performances will still grab your attention and tug at your heartstrings. That's why I love concept albums, and the fact that this is a niche trend, nonetheless a trend, that makes me anticipate who will be the next Seiyu artist to challenge themselves and try something as bold and confident as releasing a concept album. So tell me, do you prefer to listen to regular albums that bring more variety to the spotlight, or cohesive stories that grab your attention in concept albums? Let me know in the comments. And remember, leave your comments as complex or as simple as they may be, and you can be featured on upcoming episodes of Seiyu Lounge. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the Hand That Feeds HQ's weekly male Seiyu and music-related content, hit the subscribe button. I'll return next week with another episode of Seiyu Lounge. Thank you for listening, and see you guys around.